inadequate role models. Some boys are fortunate in being able to learn positive masculinity from highly evolved grandfathers or uncles. Not having the extra parenting of the father shows up in some unusual ways. Sons are more likely to be delinquent, and daughters are more likely to act out by throwing tantrums and disturbing their classes. One-parent families are not limited to those headed by mothers, of course. We also have single fathers. Children reared by their fathers also face obstacles. Some are mirror images of the mother-headed family, so all the same problems we just talked about, especially the problem of a single father teaching womanhood to his daughter, a task that in a two-parent family usually falls on the mother. Whether a man or a woman, the single parent must try to be both mother and father. So it is really difficult when there's only one parent. A recurring problem in all families is how to discipline children. They need guidance, role models, and corrective measures when they disobey or get in trouble. But deciding what disciplinary methods to use and how long to apply them is difficult. And it's easy to either be excessively lenient or excessively controlling. To find the proper balance of explanation, support, reward, and punishment is not easy for any two parents, but it's especially difficult for one. Now let's talk about runaway children. So the FBI no longer reports on the number of runaway children each year, so it can be hard to picture just how many there are. And we know that children are not fleeing from happy homes. Some are escaping family violence, sexual abuse, or are told to leave by their parents, called push-ups. Many runaways get involved in prostitution and pornography when they have no money and nowhere to go. So we saw this back in week 5 when we were talking about the example of Justin Bowling and things like that. Family violence is another family problem. Police and welfare workers know the scene all too well. Battered child, battered wife, husband, parent, even grandparent. But we'll talk a little bit more about family violence in a bit. Next, let's look at our theoretical perspectives of the families. So for most of us, family is a major support system. We have our family of orientation. Those are the ones who rear us, who introduce us to the world, and teach us how to cope with life. Our family of procreation is a family created through marriage and blood, like a married couple about to have their first child. So for some people, their family of orientation and their family of procreation are the same, but for some, you may not have been raised by the family that you came from. So that's why it's important to distinguish between the two. So with the high value placed on marriage and family, why is divorce still so common? So let's look at symbolic interaction. Symbolic interactionists look at what people expect out of marriage. Expectations of marriage have moved from the function of stability and procreation to meeting emotional needs, right? We used to marry to be financially stable, to have kids, but now we mostly marry for that. Although some people still marry for those other reasons too. These expectations have been bound symbolically into what we call love. Our cultural expectation of the one true love at times sets us up for disappointment. We all know nobody's perfect, so if we have this ideal that's somebody perfect out there, we're going to be disappointed, you know? Marriage can't last on a forever high, and couples may take this to mean a marriage has failed. Changing ideas about children also matter. Children were once seen as miniature adults and were put to work, but they're now seen as vulnerable and innocent beings. Ideas of children changing also led to ideas about parenting changing, which puts additional stress on marriages. Children are dependent on their parents for much longer until they reach adulthood, and we expect parents to nurture children until that time. Marital roles are also changing. The husband breadwinner and the wife homemaker roles are not as common today, and roles of husband and wife are not as clearly defined as they once were, and this sometimes leads to frustration and discontent. Ideas about marriage themselves have also changed, with more people perceiving alternatives to marriage as acceptable, like living together before marriage, which is called cohabitation, or simply remaining single. Perceiving alternatives as more desirable also opened the door to divorce. Changing ideas about divorce have also led to it becoming more common. Divorce was once taken so seriously that very few people divorced, as it represented failure and irresponsibility. Now for some, divorce represents a fresh start. And lastly, legal changes have made it easier to get a divorce now compared with the past. And we'll learn about that with our exercise later. Let's look at this from a functionalism standpoint. When functionalists analyze social change, they look at home change in one part. When functionalists analyze social change, they look at how change in one part of society affects its other parts. So functionalists explain divorce based off of the 6 key functions of the family. There's economic production, socialization of the children, care of the sick and aged, recreation, sexual control of family members, and reproduction. The Industrial Revolution and urbanization has significant impact on these functions, reducing each of these functions and contributing to divorce. So again, before industrialization, the family worked together as a team to survive and produce income. When fathers were separated from their families to work in the factories, family dependence on one another weakened, right? Dad was no longer there, he was there, but he wasn't there. Governments grew larger and took over some of the family functions, like creating schools with mandatory attendance. Children left the homes where they were primarily socialized and went to school where they were now socialized away from their families. So for some, that's their first taste of life outside of their family, is when they go to school. The same thing happened with the care of the sick and the aged. It was once a family matter, right? We would take care of our elderly. There weren't a lot of trained physicians. Medicine drifted to being under government control, and hospitals and other medical agencies have expanded. Medical care has shifted from the family to medical specialists. Now we put our elderly in retirement homes, convalescent homes, things like that. Before industrialization, fun and recreation happened in the home, with card games and dances being popular. Now, there's many businesses that have sprung up and compete to get that income. Switching gears, the family traditionally controlled the sexual behavior of its members. Only sexual relations in marriage were viewed as legitimate. Sexual relations outside of marriage, even between engaged couples, was considered immoral at one point. The sexual revolution opened many alternatives to marital sex. They changed standards of sexual behavior, and that weakened the family's control over the sexuality of its members. And even reproduction has increasingly moved outside of the traditional family unit of husband and wives. Single parents reproduce, and birth control has helped more people be in control of reproduction. So essentially, all these changes have weakened the functions of the family. And lastly, we have conflict theory. Conflict and feminist theorists stress that marriage and family goals reflect the basic social inequality that runs through society. So historically, women have served men as a wife, sister, and mother. The wife, again, was expected to prepare her husband's food, take care of his clothing, and to satisfy his sexual and emotional needs. The woman's life included the care of the children and the home. This backstage work is called the reproductive labor, the work that a wife or a woman performs behind the scenes that allows her breadwinner husband to flourish in his public life. Traditionally, fathers have control of all the members of the family. Men were once allowed to discipline not only their children, but also their wives. Beating a wife at one point was considered permissible if she became rebellious or had an affair. Male domination has reigned over marriage and family since its inception. Marriage has also been seen as an arena for ongoing historical struggle. Industrialization brought major change to husband and wife relationships. As more and more women took paid jobs, their experiences at work changed their views of the world. Increasingly, wives came to resent arrangements that women at earlier periods had taken for granted. Housework and childcare became a pivotal source of conflict. Women started complaining that it was unfair for them to work outside of the home and to shoulder all the housework and childcare. The husbands resented this accusation, pointing out how many more hours they were putting in at work. Fundamental change has taken place in gender relations. As more wives and mothers took paid jobs outside the home, their paychecks also become essential to the family's income and survival. This is also followed by a gradual change in the husband's and wife's sense of what is fair, and there's a slow shifting of greater power to wives. Now let's talk about some research findings. So there's a few major trends in marriage and divorce. So some of the major trends in marriage and family include postponing marriage, cohabitation, remaining single, being a couple with no children, family violence, sexual abuse, and care of the elderly. The changes in age at first marriage are startling. They're so significant that we have experienced a U-turn in age at first marriage. The U-turn has been so complete that today we are at the opposite end of the extreme. Today's average first-time bride and groom are older than at any other point in U.S. history. The average bride is 28 and the average groom is 29. A few decades ago, most men and women between the ages of 25 and 29 were married. Now most of them are single, so people are getting married later in life. As an alternative to marriage, there has also been an increase in cohabitation, living together in a sexual relationship outside of a marriage. Most couples don't cohabit because they are opposed to marriage. Rather, they figure that they're not yet ready for marriage. They are attracted to one another and want a relationship that is more united and fulfilling than just going out together. Many fear that their relationship isn't strong enough to handle the commitments and responsibilities of marriage. Some hope that a stronger commitment will develop and that they will marry later. Others know that the relationship is temporary and cohabitating is just a time between relationships. Finances are another primary reason to cohabit instead of marrying. In the U.S., about 1 of 7 or 14% of wives do not give birth. Some couples agree before marriage not to have children, while others plan to have children but never do. Those who plan to have children but do not have them go through this gradual process. They postpone getting pregnant while they're working towards some goal, like maybe graduating from college, buying a house. Gradually, sometime emerges as they shift from postponement to a vague future, such as having a child when they reach financial independence, right? One day we'll have a child. Goals like this have a tendency to recede on a foggy horizon, and this leads to the third stage. The couple decides that not having children might be more advantageous to them. The couple enters a fourth stage when they view marriage without children as a permanent rather than a temporary state. It is a cruel irony that the family, the group that we most often to look for intimacy and love, is sometimes characterized by violence. Both children and parents can become perpetrators or victims. Violence between spouses occurs in all social classes, but spouses in some social classes are more likely than others to be abusers or victims, such as low-income families, blue-collar workers, families with higher numbers of children. So to learn more about this issue, we're going to watch a video in our book. So let me pull that up. So this is Domestic Violence in Rural America, Survivor Stories.
My dream was just to have the perfect kids and the perfect husband, the perfect life. The first time he ever hit me was because the macaroni and cheese didn't taste right. You know, people are like, why did you just leave? Well, it's not as easy as you think to just leave. He made a lot of threats. He made a lot of threats to hurt the things that was most precious to me was my kids. And so I stayed.
In Illinois, we have close to 13 million people. It's estimated at least 300,000 of those people are domestic violence victims.
We could have 2 to 3 calls a night on domestic sometimes. I mean, it happens quite often around here.
Look at the rural parts of the country, and I don't care what state you're in. To get anywhere to do anything, you have to drive a long ways. So first of all, you have to have a car that runs. You have to have a phone that works. Our child welfare systems aren't there. There's no hospital down there. You can't get access to resources.
A lot of times when women get married around here, they don't get jobs, they stay home and take care of the kids, because if they do go to school, there's really no job. This has always been kind of like a coal mining industry in Southern Illinois. That's about all there is, the prison system and coal mining.
When I was little, I wanted to go into coal mines, but family told me I couldn't do it because I was a woman. So it's like they don't even give us a chance.
It's all you can do to make ends meet. Even if you both have full-time jobs, it's rough. It's just rough. And 9 out of 10 women stay for the same reason I did. How was I gonna make it with 4 kids by myself?
I have stayed in a relationship because of money. And I have been through abuse because of it. I needed money for my kids because I didn't know what else to do.
Someone has chosen that they want to be in control of the person they're in partnership with. They have a bunch of tools that they use, whether it's physical, financial, emotional.
He is a terrorist. He has one victim that he terrorizes, not all of America, but this one person. And a lot of people don't see that, don't realize that, but she's terrorized each and every day.
My son was telling me how he was abused by my ex-husband when I was gone. He would beat him and tell him if he told, he would beat me. So basically, my son took beatings to protect me. And that's really hard as a mom to understand when your baby takes beatings for you.
And everybody, well, why don't you just leave him? Why don't you just leave him? He would say, well, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill me if you leave. Look, guys, you do not understand how hard it is to leave an abusive relationship.
When he was abusing me all those years, every time that I would call the police, they would just tell him to calm down, everything would be okay. They'd ask him to leave and drive around the block.
We would sometimes believe a lot of what the man said and not so much the women, because we had the attitude that she must like him because she stayed with him.
It's been 25 years. Glenn came home that night from work. He abused me for 7 hours and 45 minutes. I thought he had fell asleep, so I thought it was going to be over with. So I got up and I was starting to tiptoe. I was going to go in there in the kid's bedroom. And when I did, he had laid the gun down on the floor beside the couch. And I seen him move and go to grab for it. And I don't even remember, somehow I dove for it. And somehow I got it before he did, I don't know. And just turned my head and fired. I didn't know if I hit the couch, if I hit him, where I hit him. And he stood up and turned around. I looked and I see that I had hit him. And it's been a hurting time. Me and Glenn were together for 12 years. Only man that I've ever actually loved. I never wanted it to get to this point, but I don't feel like I had a choice.
I was probably the first that got the training that was needed, for us to understand, I guess, more or less the female side of this. When they're a male abuser, they're seeing their father do it, they're seeing their grandpa do it, they think it's normal. You gotta break that cycle.
You know, I've made it this far. Now it's my turn to love my children and grandchildren unconditionally. If you could just save one other person, it's worth it.
Once we all connect the dots and everyone stands up together and says, we're going to teach our children different ways, then we'll begin to make a difference.
I need it.
So that was some people's experiences with family violence. All right, so continuing our research findings, we're going to talk about marital rape, incest, and widowhood. So until recently, there was no such thing as marital rape. When a couple married, it used to be assumed by law and common sentiment that the wife was consenting to sex for the rest of her life. Legally then, rape in marriage did not exist, a situation that still exists in many countries. Ideas and laws concerning the wife's duty to have sex when her husband wanted it came gradually. Helping to bring about this change were articles and speeches by the feminists of the 60s and 70s. Yet it took until the 90s for marital rape to be recognized as a crime in all 50 states. Sociologists have investigated incest, which is forbidden sexual relations between relatives, such as brothers and sisters or parents and children. Around the world, incest is almost always viewed as abhorrent, sinful, and unnatural. Several generations ago, Americans lived in extended families. That is, with other relatives, uncles, grandparents, aunts, parents, and their children. Most of the elderly prefer to live near their adult children, but not with them, a situation called intimacy at a distance. This allows the elderly to maintain their own independence while respecting the privacy of their children, and yet still maintaining relationships with them. Even for people who enjoy good health and family relationships in their older years, death comes eventually. When death ends a marriage, the impact is so severe that their surviving spouse tends to die earlier than expected. Has anybody ever seen that or witnessed that? Like when an elderly person goes, their spouse will die shortly after. So that actually has a term, and it's called, it says these earlier than expected deaths observed around the world are called the widowhood effect. So pretty interesting. So let's talk about marriage today. Some seem to think that marriage is coming to an end. As we discussed earlier, our divorce rate is high, cohabitation has skyrocketed, and young people are postponing marriage. If cohabitation continues its rapid increase, eventually most people will live together, not married. But there's another side to today's marriage and family. Cohabitation has not replaced marriage. Rather, it has become a step along the way to marriage. Most people who marry today have lived with their spouse prior to getting married. Although people are taking longer to say I do, they're still making these vows. So there's kind of two perspectives on that. Some say, marriage is going away, people are living together, living in sin, doing this, doing that. While others say, marriage isn't going away, it's just happening later in life after people accomplish their goals or however we want to say it. Now let's look at social policy. Social policy for the family is mired in controversy because every policy steps on someone's toes. So a lot of times we consider what happens at home should be kept at home, right? That's like a cultural thing sometimes. And you don't like to air your dirty laundry or get other people involved, whatever the problem may be. However, we have professionals like doctors, teachers, and social workers that all surround the family. Under the guise of helping, they have stripped the family of some of its functions, eroding its capacity to provide protective intimacy. So basically, these people all tend to get involved whenever there's problems in the family. Consider the professionals who stake claim to child rearing. They profess to know the best ways to rear their children, sometimes even the correct way to do so. This makes parents worried that they might be damaging their children through well-intended but clumsy wrong parenting. Parents are encouraged to look to professionals, even though their answers may conflict with one another and change over time. So that's another thing, like doctors don't always agree on what the best route is. Therapists don't always agree on what the best route is. So we encourage these professionals to help our families, but at the same time, people are not always open and receptive to those types of help. Then there's the dilemma of taking sides. Even a policy that seems totally neutral, making financial aid available to troubled families, for instance, always gets embroiled in controversy. Some assume that a policy that helps families get money will only help families, not single people. Others view providing financial aid as an attack on family self-sufficiency. They see it as even discouraging families from looking out for themselves, making them further dependent on the looming welfare state. So we know that as well. There's always, people who think that welfare is for lazy people and that it keeps them lazy, while others see welfare as a stepping stone to help families get back on their feet. We're always gonna have controversy about that kind of stuff. Lastly, let's look at the future of the problem. As history has unfolded, the family has faced and successfully traversed major upheavals, from war to industrialization and urbanization and more. As rapid and extensive as social change is, it continues without let-up, requiring the family to continually adapt. And that's true, as time changes, the family adapts with that. Romantic notions of love and marriage are established firmly in our culture. Embedded in our cultural psyche, that idea that love is the proper basis for marriage. This is expected to continue, as well as cohabitation rates. Women's incomes increasing relative to those of men will be another push towards greater equality. With couples marrying at older ages after attaining higher levels of education, the divorce rate will decline. Even so, marriage will remain fragile, and the U.S. will continue to have a high divorce rate. Competing groups will try to influence family values and family policy. With their incompatible views of what is right and what is good, these groups will continue to battle one another. Okay, so that is pretty much the end of the lecture. We do have one reflection question, so if you guys can share your thoughts. It says 3, but you can just say 1. So what do you consider